Monday morning, August 18th, 1969. Woodstock was over. At least that's what everyone thought. The festival had been scheduled to end Sunday night. 3 days of peace and music, the poster said. But nothing about Woodstock went according to plan. The rain had turned Max Yasgur's farm into a mudfield. The fences came down on Friday. 500,000 people showed up for a festival built for 50,000. Food ran out. Medical tents overflowed. The New York State Thruway shut down because abandoned cars blocked all 3 lanes. By Sunday night, most people had left. They had jobs to get back to, school starting, families worried sick. The ones who stayed were the diehards, the believers, the ones who had hitchhiked from California or driven from Florida or walked from the parking area 5 miles away. They weren't leaving until it was truly over. Around 30,000 people remained, maybe 40,000. Nobody counted. They sat in the mud wrapped in blankets and sleeping bags, waiting, because the festival still had one act left, the closing act, the one everyone had been waiting for. Jimi Hendrix. Backstage around 7:30 a.m., the mood was tense. The rain hadn't stopped. It came down in sheets, steady and cold. The stage was soaked. Equipment was getting wet. Cables lay in puddles. The wooden platform was slick. This wasn't a light drizzle. This was a storm that showed no sign of breaking. Michael Lang, one of the festival organizers, stood near the production tent, looking out at the field. He'd been awake for 3 days straight, surviving on coffee and adrenaline. His clothes were covered in mud. His eyes were red. He'd dealt with every crisis imaginable over the past 72 hours, but this might be the worst decision yet. "We should cancel," he said to no one in particular. Around him, the production crew nodded. The festival was already a logistical nightmare. Now they were asking the biggest guitarist in the world to play in a rainstorm, on a stage covered in electrical equipment, for an audience that had been sitting in mud for 12 hours. "The liability alone," someone muttered. One of the stage managers pulled Lang aside. "Look at the field," he said, pointing. "Half those people are asleep. The other half look like they're in shock. This isn't an audience anymore. This is a disaster waiting to get worse." Lang knew he was right. This was the responsible decision. Call it off. Thank everyone for coming. Send them home. Woodstock would still be remembered as historic. No one would blame them for canceling in these conditions. But he also knew something else. Those 30,000 people had stayed through everything. Through the rain, the mud, the food shortages, the impossible conditions. They'd stayed because they believed in something, and Jimi was supposed to be the culmination of that belief. Jerry Stickles, Jimi's road manager, was even more direct. He found Jimi in one of the equipment trucks, sitting quietly, holding his white Stratocaster. "We're not doing this," Stickles said. Jimi looked up but didn't respond. "Listen to me," Stickles continued. "It's pouring. The stage is wet. Half the amps could short out. You could get electrocuted. There's maybe 30,000 people left, and they're sitting in a swamp. This is not the closing statement you want for Woodstock." Jimi ran his fingers along the guitar neck, not playing, just feeling the strings. "Plus," Stickles added, "nobody expects you to go on. Everyone will understand if we cancel. The festival's over. Most people are already gone." Jimi stood up. He slung the Stratocaster over his shoulder and walked toward the stage entrance. "Jimi," Stickles called after him. "I'm serious. This is a bad idea." Jimi didn't turn around. He just kept walking. Stickles stood there for a moment, then followed. He'd been managing Jimi's equipment and logistics for months now. He'd seen him make impulsive decisions before. But this felt different. This felt like Jimi was making a choice that went beyond music, beyond career, beyond common sense. By 8 a.m., word started spreading through the remaining crowd. "He's going on. Jimi's really doing it." People who'd been lying down sat up. Those who'd been huddled under tarps emerged. A low buzz of anticipation rippled through the mudfield. After everything, after 3 days of chaos and rain and overcrowding, after most of the world had left, Jimi Hendrix was about to play. A couple near the front of the field had been debating whether to leave. The woman, 19 years old, from Pennsylvania, had been awake for nearly 24 hours. Her boyfriend wanted to start the long walk to their car, parked somewhere miles away in a field they could barely remember. "We should go," he said. We're soaked. We're exhausted. Let's just go. Not yet, she replied, staring at the stage. If he plays and we leave now, we'll regret it forever. He looked at her, then at the stage, then back at the mud they were sitting in. You really think he's going to play in this? I don't know, she said, but I'm not leaving until I know for sure. They stayed. Backstage, the band members weren't as enthusiastic. Mitch Mitchell, the drummer, looked at his kit. The heads are soaked. This is going to sound like shit. Billy Cox on bass just shook his head. Man, I can barely feel my fingers. Larry Lee, rhythm guitar, stood under a tarp, smoking, saying nothing. Juma Sultan and Jerry Velez, the percussionists, seemed resigned. They'd played in rough conditions before, but this was different. This was dangerous. The sound crew was frantically trying to cover equipment with plastic sheeting. Cables were taped down. Amp heads were wiped with towels that immediately got soaked again. It was a losing battle. If anything shorts out up there, one technician said, someone's getting hurt. Another tech, older, with years of experience, pulled his colleague aside. I've been doing this for 15 years, he said quietly. Festival gigs, club shows, outdoor concerts. I've never seen conditions like this. If we were union, we'd refuse to work. This violates every safety protocol. So what do we do? The older tech looked at the stage, then at Jimmy, standing ready with his guitar. We do our jobs and we pray nothing explodes. At 8:30 a.m., Jimmy walked on stage. The crowd erupted, not the massive roar of 400,000 people. This was different, smaller but more intense. These were the ones who'd stayed through everything, the true believers. And now here he was, soaked before he even played a note, carrying his white Stratocaster like it weighed nothing. He plugged in, adjusted his amp. The rain kept falling. His afro was already flattened against his head. Water dripped from his jacket, from the guitar, from the microphone. He didn't speak to the crowd, didn't say good morning or acknowledge the conditions. He just started playing. The opening notes cut through the rain like a knife. Within the first minute, everyone watching understood something. This wasn't going to be a shortened set. This wasn't going to be Jimmy playing it safe, getting through a few songs and getting off stage. This was going to be everything. His fingers moved across the fretboard, and water flew off the strings. Each note rang clear despite the rain, despite the soaked equipment, despite the impossible conditions. The Stratocaster screamed and sang, and the mud field became silent except for the music and the rain. The danger was real. Every musician watching understood it. Electricity and water don't mix. The stage was slick. Jimmy's boots had no traction. One wrong step and he could fall. One short circuit and the whole rig could go up. But Jimmy played like none of it mattered. He leaned into the storm. When the wind picked up, he turned into it. When rain hit his face, he didn't wipe it away. His hands never stopped moving. The guitar became an extension of the weather itself, wailing and howling. Thunder translated into music. The rain hammered the stage. It bounced off the amplifiers. It created puddles around Jimmy's feet. His fingers should have been slipping on the strings, but they didn't. Every note was precise, intentional, powerful. The guitar wasn't fighting the rain. It was absorbing it, using it, turning weather into sound. Water streamed down the neck of the Stratocaster. Droplets formed on the tuning pegs. The pickups should have been shorting out, but somehow they held. The guitar stayed in tune even as rain poured directly onto the strings. Jimmy bent a note, held it, let it sustain impossibly long. The sound cut through the storm, through the wind, through the distance between stage and audience. It was a note that said, I'm here, I'm not leaving, this is happening. Backstage, the crew stopped trying to fix things. They just watched. Michael Lang stood at the side of the stage, transfixed. All his worry about liability, about safety, about how this would look, all of it faded. He was watching something that would never happen again. Jerry Stickles, who'd begged Jimmy not to go on, sat on an equipment case with his head in his hands, not from stress anymore, from awe. The rain intensified. The storm that had been steady became fierce. Lightning flashed in the distance. Thunder rolled across the field. The conditions that should have stopped the performance only made it more powerful. Jimmy played Voodoo Child. The song lasted nearly 15 minutes. His guitar work was both violent and delicate, matching the storm's intensity while finding moments of impossible beauty in between. Rain streamed down his face. His shirt clung to his body. The Stratocaster was drenched, but it didn't matter. The sound was bigger than the weather. During the instrumental break, Jimi closed his eyes. Rain fell on his face, and he didn't flinch. His fingers found notes that seemed to come from somewhere else, someplace beyond technique or practice. This was pure expression, raw, unfiltered, honest. In the audience, people sat motionless. Rain poured on them. They didn't care. Some had blankets over their heads, but most just sat there exposed, watching. Mud covered everything. Their clothes, their hair, their faces. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered except what was happening on that stage. A young woman near the front later remembered, "I couldn't feel my legs. I'd been sitting in the same position for hours, but I wasn't moving. None of us were. We'd waited all night for this, and now it was happening, and it was more than we'd imagined." A man sitting 20 rows back would later tell his children, "The rain was so cold it hurt. My hands were numb. I was shivering, but I couldn't look away." Jimi was playing like the storm was his instrument, like he'd summoned it just for this moment. Around 9:30 a.m., an hour into the set, something shifted. Jimi started playing the Star-Spangled Banner, the national anthem, but not as anyone had ever heard it. The guitar screamed. It wailed. It imitated bombs dropping, sirens wailing, helicopters, explosions. Jimi used feedback and distortion to create sounds of war, of chaos, of America tearing itself apart. The storm provided the backdrop, thunder punctuating the guitar's fury, rain adding its own percussion. It was aggressive, it was painful, it was beautiful. Vietnam vets in the audience sat with tears mixing with rain on their faces. This wasn't disrespect. This was truth. This was what the anthem sounded like when you'd actually been to war, when you'd seen what it cost. One vet, 23 years old, back from Saigon for 6 months, sat frozen. He'd spent those 6 months trying to forget, trying to act normal, trying to pretend the sounds in his head would eventually fade. But Jimi's guitar brought it all back. Not as trauma, as acknowledgement, as validation. Someone understood. Lightning cracked across the sky just as Jimi hit the climactic note. The timing was impossible, but it happened. Nature and music synchronized for one perfect moment. Backstage, a journalist who'd been covering the festival stood with his notebook forgotten in his hand, pages soaking, not writing, just watching. He would later write, "I've never seen anything like it. I'll never see anything like it again." It wasn't a concert, it was a reckoning. The set continued. 2 hours became 2.5. Jimi played Purple Haze, Villanova Junction, Hey Joe. Each song expanded beyond its studio version, becoming something else entirely in the rain and mud of that August morning. His fingers should have been numb. His body should have been exhausted. But he played with more intensity as the set continued, not less. Like the storm was feeding him, giving him energy instead of draining it. The Stratocaster's electronics should have failed. Water and electricity should have ended this. But the guitar kept playing, kept singing, kept screaming into the rain. Around 11 a.m., Jimi finally stopped. He stood at the microphone, soaked through, breathing hard. The rain fell steady. The crowd sat silent, not sure if it was over, not wanting it to be over. "Thank you," Jimi said quietly. "Peace." Then he unplugged and walked off stage. The crowd didn't move at first, like they were waiting for the world to restart, for reality to return. Then slowly the applause started. Not wild cheering, something deeper, recognition, respect, gratitude. These 30,000 people had witnessed something that would never be repeated. They'd stayed when everyone else left. They'd sat in a storm, and Jimi Hendrix had honored that. He hadn't canceled. He hadn't shortened the set. He hadn't protected himself or played it safe. He'd given everything. Backstage, Jimi handed his guitar to a tech and sat down on a road case. Water dripped from his hair, his clothes, his boots. Jerry Stickles walked over with a towel. "You're insane," Stickles said, but he was smiling. Jimi didn't respond. He just sat there looking out at the field, at the mud, at the people slowly standing up, starting the long walk home. Michael Lang approached. That was... He couldn't finish the sentence. What words could describe it? Jimmy looked at him. They stayed, he said simply. That's all that mattered. Years later, when people asked those who were there to describe that morning, they struggled. How do you explain what it felt like? How do you convey the impossibility of it? One man interviewed in 1989 said, everyone told him not to go on. His manager, the organizers, logic itself said cancel. But he looked at us sitting in that mud, and he played for 2.5 hours like we were the only people in the world. A woman speaking in 2019 on the 50th anniversary said, I've been to hundreds of concerts since then. I've seen every major artist you can name. Nothing has ever come close. Because that morning wasn't about the music, though the music was incredible. It was about the choice. He chose us. The woman from Pennsylvania, who'd convinced her boyfriend to stay, would marry him 2 years later. At their wedding, when asked what moment made them realize they were meant to be together, she said, sitting in the mud at Woodstock, deciding to stay when everything said leave. That's when I knew we made decisions together, even the crazy ones. The Woodstock documentary would later capture pieces of that performance. The Star-Spangled Banner would become one of the most iconic moments in rock history, but the cameras couldn't capture what it felt like to be there. The rain on your face, the mud under your body, the exhaustion and the transcendence happening simultaneously. Jimmy never talked much about that morning. In interviews afterward, when people asked about Woodstock, he'd usually focus on other aspects of the festival. But once, in a radio interview a few months before his death, someone asked him about playing in the rain. Some people said I should have canceled, Jimmy said quietly. Maybe they were right. I don't know, but I looked out there and saw people who'd been sitting in the mud all night. They could have left. They could have been dry and warm somewhere else, but they stayed, so I played. The interviewer pressed. Was it dangerous? Probably, Jimmy admitted, but that's not what I was thinking about. I was thinking about the ones who stayed. August 18th, 1969. Woodstock ended on a Monday morning, not a Sunday night. It ended in a rainstorm, not sunshine. It ended with 30,000 people instead of 400,000, and it ended perfectly.